are post the National Association settlement, and there has been a lot of uproar, a lot of misinformation, just a lot of conversation that has come out of that public announcement. So I just wanted to touch on that real briefly with our expert agents that are here today at the roundtable, and just kind of touch base with you guys and get some temperature on if you've had conversations with the public yet. Like, what is the temperature that you guys are feeling outside of the realtor world? Because, right, it shook the realtor world, and the sky was falling for a minute for a lot of real estate agents. But it's been a little bit different when we're talking to our consumers. They're maybe not as in tune, I guess, as we all are. They're not part of all of these Facebook groups and social media groups where everybody is crying and screaming and everything else, which is constantly filling our feeds. They don't have those type of information coming their way. So I'd love to just check in with any of you guys to see what kind of feedback have you been getting from your clients or prospective clients or anything. Has anybody had phone calls? Has anybody reached out?
Anytime you say you're in real estate, it's like, oh my God, it's crazy. And they say everything that's on the headlines.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, let's sit down. And it's just a lot of that, and then having to explain, and they're like, oh, I didn't know that, and it's more of that, and really just, we need to educate.
So you just put a property under contract recently.
I did.
Was it same old? Was like anything changed?
No.
Any conversations that people were confused about? Or
No, this one was, I actually was excited that it was just normal.
Seller was offering
Yeah.
compensation for the buyer at this
Yes,
point still, right?
definitely.
Okay.
Nothing was really different with that. It was busy.
We lucked out too because the
We
seller is also an agent, so he
Okay.
was maybe aware
Gotcha.
of what's going
That's
on.
probably why it made it a lot
Yeah.
easier.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And definitely helps sometimes when we have personal connections.
I knew,
When
I
the
knew the
bidding-
listing agent
Nice.
by chance. So
Okay.
So that
worked
So it all
out.
kind of worked in everyone's favor.
Yeah.
What about anybody else? Anybody else have recent?
I've had a couple of
Exposure
just
to anything?
random conversations, like, at my hair place or at the kids' events, and people's perception is obviously different than our understanding. A lot of, what's the 6%? So we don't have to pay 6% anymore, So I kind of went into, here's what it really means for you as a prospective seller or a prospective buyer. So I think they appreciated that because it breaks down what they're actually hearing, which is not as accurate as we would like.
Right.
Yeah.
I would agree.
That's what I was going to say. I think that they're hugely misunderstanding what it's all about and what we actually do to earn a commission. I think there's still that misconception that we unlock the door and guide them through filling out blanks on a contract, and that's it. So, and there's agents that have given them that impression all these years. So it's going to take some work re-educating, what we actually do for them.
I've had conversations with my sets of buyers as well as my sellers, and then also my clients who are in the sell-buy situation. So it's really guiding and advising through the lens of each of them, and discussing the pros and the cons, and setting down and figuring out what's the best course of action for them. And all my sellers have decided to move forward status quo, currently how things are that we had them signed a few months ago. And my buyers we're moving forward. We're getting acquainted with the possible, I think it's really important to stress,
Yes.
possible new situation still needs to be approved by the DOJ. So I know now that the dust has settled, we're seeing, I feel like some more level-headed news coming out where, it was the big bang at the beginning, and now it's like people have really been able to sit down and think about things. The dust has settled. Now I think you might be getting a little bit more realistic news where you have some realtors talking, you have some brokers talking,
And mortgages talking.
and mortgages. Yeah, how is this
Right.
going to?
Yeah.
It's it's the buyers who I've understood and always did understand that are going to need to be coached a little bit
Yes.
more, because it has a lot more to do with setting them up and their loan and
Right.
what is our deal going to encapsulate.
Right.
It's just a different set of circumstances.
And I sat in on a meeting yesterday with a bunch of loan officers and like regional managers in mortgage, and that was a hot topic. The topic of conversation was that there are talks with Freddie, Franny, you know, the Veterans Administration, all of that, as to whether they can change some of the caps
Yep.
of the
Seller
interested
concessions.
party contributions, IPCs, I think they're called. Interested party contributions, which had caps before and did not include commissions. So they're lobbying, I guess,
Right.
or having conversations, should that change to help the buyer. And, you know, even like I said, mentioned before, there's conversation of, do we start setting up credit card options for people? Is there other ways that they can still keep representation? Because I think the biggest concern for people right now is that it turns into the wild, wild west, and the people that can't afford it,
Right.
that need the most representation, will forego representation because they don't have the funds. So
And as a loan officer, I'm just thinking ahead to, will those things be in place before it just becomes the
Right.
Wild West all of a sudden? So maybe some of my current clients that have been pre-qualified, we haven't had those discussions just yet because nothing has technically happened yet. But will we have enough lead time to start those conversations? You know, we don't want to be mid-search and then all of a sudden come back and be like, oh, wait, we need to talk about how you're going to cover commissions. So I feel like we're just starting to peek into that timing game.
yeah, and again, originally it was mandated that this is supposed to, if approved, goes into effect in July. But we've also heard that there's no guarantees that there couldn't be some delays. So potentially there
We might
could
have more
delay
time,
that over maybe the mortgage industry trying to make some changes. So
Right.
to be seen. Speaking of conversations that we haven't had a lot of yet or recently is price change conversations. So before the camera was rolling, we were talking about, you know, we're starting to see, although we are expecting the market to kind of heat back up again here soon as we're rolling into spring, but we are dealing with potential or certain properties that maybe are not flying off the shelf on day one. Maybe they're not flying off the shelf on week 1, week 2. So we are having to have price change conversations with our listings. And a lot of times, and we haven't had to do that a whole lot for the last few years. You know, you've had your 1 or 2 here and there, but most of the properties have sold at what we're asking or more than what we're asking for 3+ years now. But we are getting to the point where some clients' houses are not flying off the shelf. So what do you guys have a specific rule of thumb that you go by with pricing if a house hasn't sold after a certain amount of time? Like, how does that work for you? I know I have my opinions on that, but everybody handles that a little bit differently. So who wants to jump in and add to that? Right
Well,
now?
I think it starts with pricing. It's difficult right now because, you know, neighbors will see that their next door neighbor is sold for this inflated price, and it was just the scenario of whatever particular period of time that house went on the market, and maybe they priced it a little bit lower so that the price would climb up when multiple offers came in. So I think pricing just in general is difficult for anyone, and that's doing in-depth, really looking at options, you know, not just your typical neighborhood, maybe stretching it out a little bit further, not going a whole year back because that's going to show a whole different set of numbers, maybe only going back 90 days to do your comps. So I think that in itself, if you don't have an agent that's been really taught well how to do a comparable analysis, and they're depending on the algorithm of a computer set CMA, I think that's where you fall into some trouble. is if you let the computer calculate, then you're gonna get things like Zestimates, which are wrong. So you need education on how to really pull those numbers to get a good price in the first place. And that's just hard for anybody right now, I feel.
Yeah. I mean, comping a house is a full day activity for me.
Yes.
No doubt. Plus, it's me marinating that over maybe a day or two and really thinking, making sure I checked everything off the list, and then going back and re-looking and rethinking.
Yes.
So it is usually a 2 to 3 day in-depth systemic situation, as well as putting like some gut and some
Yes.
understanding the area and the subdivision and the lot and the school systems and all of these things.
For
It's
sure.
actually quite complex. When you have an appraiser do it, it's extremely complex.
Yes. And they take a
So-
week.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. It could take a week for them to really dive in and do the pluses and the minuses compared to the recent closes, the recent pendings, and the recent for sales. So it is a very complex thing. It's not just we hit a button and everything is automatically
nice.
done.
And I do
Yeah.
feel like it's a lot of pressure on you all too, because we do have a lot of the clients now going not contingent on financing or hoping to, but then it kind of hinges on that appraisal. And so the question comes back, well, how confident are we in the comps that were just done? And that's a lot of pressure. Not being an appraiser by trade, but yet having this expertise to really run the comps, to put a number on it before a formal appraisal has been done. That's a lot. That's, you really do want to have somebody that is educated on that process, like you said. It's a lot.
And
in this
because of
market.
that, we as agents have to then, we start with a price. We start with a price that we think is the right price within a range that we feel is gonna get the most interest. Cause there's not a crystal ball.
Right.
It's not an exact science. It's a little bit of gut, like you said. It's a little bit of data. And it's sometimes, unfortunately, a little bit of let's try and see, especially in this type of market.
Right.
Because there have been times that based on the comps, we would have said, no way in HE double hockey stick is this house gonna sell for that, and then it did. So then we're like, oh,
There's a
well,
couple
now
houses that
we're-
that's happened on.
yeah,
We're
so,
like, wow,
so
okay.
who are we now to say, well, it's
Yeah.
never gonna happen, right? So sometimes we will give a seller a little bit of leeway
Sure.
if it's not maybe in the zone we're thinking gut-wise and
Right.
data-wise,
Yeah.
but maybe some other ones said, maybe, I don't know, maybe it's possible, right? So we give some leeway, we've given some leeway.
Of course.
And some of them work, but some of them don't. So I think what's really, really important in the pricing aspect is, as an agent, we have to be on top of trying to read between the lines.
Right.
Because I think what sellers don't understand a lot of times is that we don't always get direct feedback or data. Like, we have to do a lot of smart guessing, based on either experience or what we typically see or what other houses have done or what our current listings are doing. We're reading a lot into what the market is thinking about their house or what buyers are potentially thinking about their house that haven't even materialized, right? Because it's a lot easier to go, hey, we had 50 showings and 23 of those agents gave us feedback. So therefore, based on all that, we should probably do X, Y, and Z because we got a really good sampling, right? That usually doesn't happen. Usually if we're getting 50 showings, we're getting an offer, right?
Right.
So what happens a lot of times is maybe the showings are light. Or you do get some showings and then you get some generic feedback or no feedback.
Right.
And then there's moments of no showings and then you're everybody's kind of like, ah.
Yeah.
And from my experience, sometimes a week or a 2 week isn't enough to read between those lines because you can have little market blurps. Like some of the stuff we've listed in the last few weeks, like we went into right when it's spring break. So you got one set of town going on spring break this week, and then the next set of towns going on spring break the next week, so that affects the market for like a 2-week swing. Then you got weather sometimes that comes in, and we had
Holidays.
Easter.
Yeah, that
You
was
know,
a double whammy.
We had early Mardi Gras parades and, you know, St.
St.
Patrick's
Patrick's
Day
Day.
parades, and that it can affect open houses.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So we have to take all that into account and be mind readers of buyers that we haven't even talked to, right? So that's when it becomes difficult to guide sometimes a seller. When is it the right time to reduce the price? And there's some old school agents out there. That's why I was curious if y'all had a rule of thumb for yourself. I've heard many people say, agents before, that, you know, my rule of thumb is if they don't get an offer or, you know, 10 showings in the first 2 weeks or 30 days or whatever, then they do an automatic price reduction, like blah, blah, blah. And I personally disagree with anything automatic.
Yeah.
Because if you're doing automatic, then you're not taking into account market blips. And sometimes it can just be a weird, like on top of everything that I just said, we also had the NAR settlement come out.
Yeah.
The
Right,
settlement,
right.
Which then everybody's like, ooh, you know,
Everybody's
what's
flustered,
happening? So then a seller maybe isn't selling, or a buyer is afraid to go look at houses because they think they got to pay a commission. Like there's those type of things that can play in.
I feel like each house is really its own case. It's like
It
its
is.
own
True.
study,
Yeah,
you know,
it
because they are
is.
unique in so many ways. Even though the one next door could be very similar, there's something that makes that one different, and it all factors in
Yes.
to that price.
I would agree.
I feel like our marketing skills, you know, sellers for large part haven't had to do much the past few years because it's been so heavily a seller's market. So I think buyers are tired, they're scared. And I think it's going to take a little bit more of the marketing finesse, you know, like listen and that trust, you know, in the consultation, build the trust and relationship with the sellers so that if it does need to be painted or staged or something should be addressed, the days of maybe not having to have to do that are changing. Maybe the buyer's moods are exhausted and they don't want to have to do all that when they buy the house. So I think a little bit of that needs to adjust.
I think marketing also plays in a huge part for us to get enough activity. Maybe we don't have the buyer face to face to talk to, but if we can go, hey, look, we can tell now, because that's what's so amazing about technology now versus when I first got into the business. I couldn't quantify how many people saw my Post Dispatch ad. I couldn't tell you how many people opened up Harmon Homes magazine or the real estate book and said, oh, there's her house for sale. I'm going to think about that one. Like, we had no idea. But now, with the type of marketing that we do, there is a lot of analytics and trackers that can tell us not who the buyer is or necessarily what they're thinking, but their patterns can give us an idea of what they're thinking. So, for example, if we put a listing out and we hit all the marketing and we get a bunch of exposure, then we know it's not an exposure issue because we've seen people coming to the different links and sites and ads and opening them up. So therefore, we know the public is seeing that this house is for sale. So we've got one thing checked off the box. But then, what was their next steps? Did they save it? Did they come back again? Like those type of things can be tracked on different sites in different ways. So we kind of start trying to read those patterns to give us that read between the lines, guessing on, hey man, based on the amount of time you've been on the market, X amount of people have looked at it, X amount of people have saved it. That's a pretty normal ratio. Or, ooh, that ratio is really low. They're looking, nobody's saving it. Like I was doing some comps last night. There was a property that was on for 579 days.
Wow.
And it had like, I don't want to say 2,300 looks or something. It had 3 saves.
Wow.
And I was like, wow, like that's crazy that it was that low of saves. It tells you how much out of whack that pricing was on that house, or something about that marketing that wasn't appealing to the buyer that they clicked and then they left.
Right.
Yeah.
Which goes back to like the launch, you know, like the launch of the house
You
is
gotta
like the
dangle it.
grand opening, you know? So if you are in a hurry to get it on and maybe it's not staged right or painted or, you know, that's gonna set you back.
Yeah.
Maybe just take a breath, maybe do some of the pre-marketing coming soon and test the price because things like the views and things with coming soon that you can check
Yeah.
before you even go active,
Right.
and then maybe make some adjustments before then if you can.
I think those initial meetings are so important from a visual standpoint. So I went into a meeting, a listing appointment, knowing that I was going to have a battle on price. And so I was extra diligent in providing visuals. Okay, here's our house. Here's the 4 houses that have sold in your neighborhood.
sure.
And look at the pricing between the 2 of these, and here's where you would like to be, and here's where these sold at. And by the end, his mind changed by $100,000
Right,
in a lower direction,
correct.
comparable to what's going on in the neighborhood. Because people do get the postcards. They don't, when the
Yes.
postcards are sent out, they generally don't have all the pictures of the inside of
Right.
the house. It's the front of the house.
Right.
Just sold for $780,000. And it could easily, totally updated. Well,
Yeah.
all they see is the $780,000 for the neighbor's house around the corner.
Right.
They don't see all the fine print.
Right.
So it really is visually explaining as opposed to words. Kind of let the
Right.
pictures do the talking
Yeah.
and the
Paper
data.
comps to me are junk.
Yeah, agreed.
Junk.
Agreed.
I always bring them,
Yes.
but I bring the links to those too.
Yes.
Because if you can't show the seller
100%.
what the buyer is seeing apples
Visually,
to
yeah.
oranges, you can't really get a good.
And it's actually even more effective on an iPad because you can
Yes.
get, as opposed to your phone.
Oh,
or
for sure.
You can get those pictures that are so bright and so beautifully renovated and done, and it really is more impactful. But the other thing too is knowing that I was having a battle a pricing battle going in. I have my pricing adjustment paperwork that I always share with them as well. And here's my plan, generally speaking. If we have this many appointments booked and we don't get an offer within the first X amount of days, depending on the neighborhood and the area and the seller, then we're looking at a X amount of price reduction. If we have appointments but we're still not getting any offers, then we might be looking at this adjustment. And if there's no activity whatsoever, then we're looking at this adjustment. So it's like a three-tiered adjustment. But having that conversation up front allows you to then more easily have that conversation
Yeah.
When it's happening.
a month
happening,
in.
yeah.
I also feel like repricing after you've been to the house is something that we're starting to see more and more also. Like we'll have an idea going to the listing appointment, but then after being there, walking around, we might not have seen like some of the upgrades from the old listing or something like that. I think, coming in with a hard number is a thing of the past.
Sure.
Like we're gonna have to come in with an idea, reassess, go back, do a little more homework, and then come back with a different number. I've just noticed that that's been happening more and more too.
I always find pricing to be a collaborative effort between myself and the seller. Nobody knows their own neighborhood
Right.
generally better than the people that live there. Now, I could have some analytical data
Right.
to back it up,
Right.
and I do know a lot of the houses that I've been in a ton of them. So there's my view of it, but there's their view. They may know, they know all the nooks and crannies
Yes.
of their house and all the updates, and they know that the neighbor
Yes.
got this, but really should
Or,
have done
oh,
this.
that's that lot that totally drops off and has the flooding issue, and you're like,
Exactly.
oh, we can't tell that from the MLS says it's an amazing lot, that's all we get to
There's a
see.
big
Exactly.
That does matter.
So it is, and I tell them going in, I'm like, let's partner up. Let's really get together, put our heads together, and manage this pricing
Right.
conversation, and let's come up with the best price. And I feel that when they view you as their partner in pricing, as opposed to the ruler of the pricing, you get much better results.
And like you said, they do have details that we're not privy to sometimes. Sometimes they don't, sometimes
Right,
they
right.
do, But, so you have a pricing strategy in play. We dealt with one recently where, and this is, I'm no stranger to this feedback from sellers, but it always makes me chuckle and cringe at the same time, is when
Tringe?
Tringe, Tringe, I like it. When you have a house that is either not getting showings or not getting offers. As agents, we know there's a problem, especially if we can go back and say, hey, man, there's been this many people that have looked at it. They know you're here. They're just not taking the next step, because the whole idea with selling houses now is marketing first. Marketing is what everything we have to do to get the eyeballs, to get the attention. It's the house and the price that then takes it from there. So we bring the moths to the flame, but then that flame's got to shine, right? That flame's got to then be enticing to get the people to want to take the next step. So if we're seeing either a huge amount of activity online, of exposure, and then we're either A, not getting the next step of a showing, or we do get some showings, but then no offers. To us, that's a glaring sign that something is off. And I've always allocated it to one of three things. It's either location, right? Exposure is normal, so you can say, what, exposure's here, people are seeing it. Or if they're not seeing it, then that's something on our end that we need to change around. New photography, different ads, whatever, that's for us. But then the other thing is location, can't change that, and price. So price, location, exposure. But a lot of pushback that we'll get from sellers when we have this conversation, especially it seems to be very traditional sellers or people that haven't had a lot of experience in the last 10 or 15 years in the market, is that, well, why would I do a price reduction when no one's made me an offer? Right?
Or I want to see an offer before I will consider a price reduction.
Backwards thinking.
It is completely backwards thinking, but not unusual to hear as a listing agent sometimes when you've got that type of data, but in their mind, well, someone will make me an offer and then I'll know if I need to reduce it.
If you reduce, then they may.
Right. And the conversations that we have to have with sellers a lot of times is those offers would have come if you were within striking distance or you had the features that they were looking for at this price. Because a lot of times it can be features, which you can correct with price, but agree with me or disagree with me, you have to over-correct with price a lot of times when you don't have the
You don't
features in
have
the
both,
house.
yeah.
Right? It's not just, oh, the price of wood floors would be $10,000 to make a $10,000 price reduction. Probably not. You're probably going to have to do a $20,000 or $25,000 price reduction if you walk into a house that looks terrible on their floors. So those are the conversations, but the number one thing, being 27 years in the business, that I've always heard that makes me twinge or whatever, cringe and twinge and laugh and chuckle, is well, I don't want to change my price until someone makes me an offer. It is 100% backwards. Anybody disagree?
I do not disagree.
Would you agree that in this market, buyers have been conditioned for the last 3 or 4 years that whatever the list price is the bare bottom of what the seller is going to take, and they're probably expecting more?
Yes,
Well,
at least in the first week.
Yeah.
I think they hesitate because they don't want to insult the seller,
Right.
number one. So, yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
And because people actually have to run comps when
Yes.
some agents have to, you have to run a comp and prove that price is correct, and some
Right.
people
Yes.
don't do that.
Yeah, and I would say the buyers I've dealt with, that when we pull up a house and they're asking $650, you walk in thinking $700. If I don't offer $700 for this house, I'm probably not going to get it. So as you're walking through, you're not comparing it to the other $650 houses. You're mentally comparing it to the $700,000 houses that you're looking at. So you're either talking yourself into it or you're talking yourself out of it, out of a price that you're assuming
It's gonna
based
go
on the
for
market that the seller is expecting. So if you don't think it's measuring up to the $700,000 houses, it might not be that saved house for you, and you might not make that offer, right?
Right.
But if it was in the seller's mind, well, I would have taken $625. They should make me an
You just
offer.
never know.
Well, then you should be down at $625,
Right.
Because now they're thinking you want $650
Right?
at $625, so you're getting closer and closer. Would you say you had
Absolutely.
that somewhat?
Yes.
In fact, we have to adjust our buyers' searches to be
Sure.
at least 50,000 under where they're approved for.
Right.
Just so
Knowing
Leave
it's
a cushion.
probably gonna
Yeah,
ask for it.
knowing
It's
that
the
we're
same
gonna
as
have
if
to.
you're going on Marketplace, like, hey, I'm going to sell this watch. I'm going to go up this high because you know they're going to haggle.
Yes, right,
Same thought,
exactly.
right?
Right.
But,
So flip it around. What what are buyers thinking? Besides that example that I just gave, what else, if a house is priced a certain way and they don't do a price reduction within a certain amount of time, what are some stigmas that the buyers might be reading into or thinking versus we had our seller stigma of,
Something
oh,
wrong.
Yeah.
you know, this is, the buyer's gonna make me an offer, like, we're already just saying that's a wrong way of thinking, but what about buyers? Is there anything that they think?
I feel like the buyers are thinking that the seller is gonna be difficult to work with if they haven't done a price reduction. Say their house has been sitting and no offers and no price reduction. Sometimes the buyers are like, does that mean they're digging their heels in on everything?
Or
Right,
touch of the market.
contingencies and
Right.
inspections.
Yeah.
Right.
So the buyers are leery
Yeah.
of
It looks
both
like you're not-
scenarios.
yeah.
If they did reduce, then sometimes the buyer like a $10,000 price reduction in the first 2 weeks. Oh my
What's
gosh!
wrong?
Like what's wrong with it?
Yeah.
You know.
Right.
So there's
They
both.
can't win.
Yeah.
Right, right. Pricing really is so important, and it tends to skew a little more advantageous if you price at or just below market as opposed to pricing over.
But it's such a hard target to.
It is. It is a moving target.
Bullseye, you
It is a
know?
moving target for sure, for sure. But and it's not the. Here's the main thing that I think is so important to understand as a seller and a buyer. When you do list your house, let's say you list it for easy numbers 500, and you get an offer for let's say you get 15 offers on that $500 home. It's in a very hot market. It's in a very well-known area. It's very desirable. It's updated. It's ready to sell. You get 15 offers. Of those 15 offers, 10 of them are hovering at or near that 500,000. Okay, and then there's a few that are maybe 3 to 5% above that. Okay, but then you have I call them the outliers. Those one or two that just are so far, they just pull out speeding fast, so far above the other ones that it's usually in the 8 to 12% over range from the houses that I'm seeing. That's a pretty good chunk of change. I've even seen them go in the 20% over range on a $50,000, on a $500,000 home, sneaking up towards like the 575, 600 range. That's what's driving these huge pushes in price from year over year.
Yes.
It's not the 80% or 90% of the contracts that hit right near the original sale price. It's the 1 or 2 of the 15 that you get that are the outlier prices. So
And you can't always guarantee that duplication.
you can't.
Right.
You can't guarantee it from a buyer's side
Right.
or a seller's side. If you advise on the buy side, oh no, you got to go 10 to 15% higher on this, and then you see that it closes 2 weeks later at $5,000 over the ask price, you're like, oh gosh,
Yeah.
you can't advise that. And on the sell side, you can't. It's hard to advise it as well because you will see every once in a while people push that high price and get it. That's why I say, in some instances, this market makes a liar out of everyone.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
it really does.
That's true.
It's really tricky. So we just are working with statistics that skew advantageously towards one side, but you're always going to have that 1% that doesn't.
Well, and those people that come in aren't from here.
That's
Typically,
what I was
they're
gonna
always,
say.
especially in my neighborhood, it's always that. Oh my God, this
Some
house
of
sold
them.
for $975, and I'm like, how is that possible? Oh, this is a person from
California.
Massachusetts.
Yeah.
And it's like,
Yeah.
okay, they're like, oh wow,
Colorado,
they see this
Colorado,
$700,000
yeah.
house. This is cheap.
Right,
Yeah,
right,
right.
right.
You know, so
It's a
that's used it for
reload.
everybody.
We did see that a lot in
Yeah.
the past like 3-4 years
Oh,
where
yeah.
people migrated
Reloads,
here.
yeah.
And they made a killing
They did.
from where they were moving from, so they didn't come to play games. They just were like
Cash.
cash.
Yeah, they had it. They
Yeah.
can go. Yeah, and so that's part of educating too. Like, oh, well, you know, the seller comes when you're trying to sell a house. Like, well, this house sold for this, but you got to
Right.
explain that to them right then and there. Like, it's probably someone out of town. They didn't know the area, and then you know they just wanted the house because everybody's in this frenzy. Like, I got to buy this house. I have to pay $100,000 over.
Right, right.
But then the seller still thinks, well, why not? I can do it. You know,
Yeah.
I can sell.
Yeah,
and
if-
it does happen, right?
Yeah, that's what
Yeah.
I was gonna say.
And
The
it's
stars
more
do
so than
align.
not,
Yeah.
you're like, oh.
Every once in a while.
But here's the question: how often does that happen when a house is sitting on the market for
No.
a few
Oh,
weeks?
it doesn't, no.
Not very.
Not very
So you
often.
can try it for a certain, so maybe you try it for a certain amount of
Yeah.
time and then
You do.
get
That's
rid
why
of
the
it.
coming
Yeah.
soon is such a good tool to use when you're a little unsure, because then if your phone's blowing up and it's coming soon because showings aren't allowed, then you'll know that when you go active, you're
This
gonna
is
get
gonna
that
be
same
Well,
kind
then
of
always go
activity.
on the lower, price a little under,
Modest.
because
Yeah.
the buyers will drive it up anyway.
Right.
And I'm starting to see more price changes in coming soon.
I'm
So
too.
you could, people, need to understand that you can
Yes.
you can change your price at any time. In withheld, which is kind of our stealth status that we park our homes to
Right.
prep them and prepare them for market. And then usually coming soon, at which point you're kind of testing the pricing and testing the awareness and how many phone calls you're getting. And then pricing can be adjusted during that stage. I generally try to zone in, make sure my pricing is really good prior to that, but I've seen
Try.
changes, yeah. And then when you go active, you can
That's when
change then.
I feel like the caliber of agent is where this comes into play. You have, if you, and I shouldn't say if you have someone that's just jumping at the bit to put their sign in your yard and let's get rolling on whatever price you feel we need to go. That's just not, I just don't feel that that's the best strategy, and it's not gonna, it might tank. I mean, if the stars align, then
There's
congratulations.
only a small
but
period that happened,
Right.
when all these new agents
Exactly.
came in and just sold it like crazy.
Yeah, and
Right,
I
right.
feel like
Not
that's
anymore.
the caliber of agent that we're gonna start seeing as this news and the commissions and
Yeah.
all this stuff is changing. I think, the cream of the crop rise to the top, and it's
Right.
those people that are going to do the homework, do the analysis, do the right marketing, and not just rush out the next day and put a sign in your yard. It's gonna take a little more work, and that's
Yep.
where we start to show our value.
Right, right.
Right. And my rule of thumb has always been fail fast. Sure, we'll try it.
Yeah.
We can try it. But if we're not getting the
Plan B.
results that
Let's
I
not
feel
sit
like
here.
we should be
Yeah.
getting based on my bigger view of things, because a seller's in a vacuum. A seller only knows what's happened with the seller's house, or perhaps their neighbor's house. They've been paying attention. But we get a broader view of the market, other listings, that type of information that we can then gauge against. It really isn't a market condition, because all of our other listings had 50 showings and we
Right.
had multiple offers, and it's just you that's not, this particular property that isn't. So therefore, I can be very bold and say, it wasn't Easter, it wasn't spring break.
what you're
It's
doing
something
here.
that we're doing
Yeah.
here that
Yeah.
we need to change, it's not working. And so as your advocate and as your expert, we are needing to read into that type of thing and then make recommendations, because yes, buyers do start thinking, well, why has no one else wanted it?
Right.
If no one else wanted it, then either something's wrong with it, or the seller's out of touch, the seller's not negotiable. You don't ever want to come across like you're a difficult, unnegotiable seller.
Right.
So little changes even help, and then we evaluate, and then we change and we evaluate. So that is the moving target, I think somebody said earlier, that can happen with pricing. And sometimes you need to make a change and then give it a second to take. It
But if
doesn't
we-
necessarily
You gotta listen.
change
Listen to
everything
that, or the-
tomorrow.
yeah,
It's gotta
the
go back
consumers.
out and recirculate, hit people's inboxes again. Maybe they're in town, maybe they're not in town, that type of thing. So we gotta let it saturate, do the changes, saturate again, and then keep reevaluating until we do finally get to the point that either we make some changes on how it's appearing, or we change the price till we get it to a point where either a new buyer just came on the market, or the current buyers that were kind of hovering on it online, but it wasn't checking all their boxes, now for the price might go, I'll forgo A, B, and C, because now I'm getting more square footage, an extra bedroom or bathroom on this one, even though it doesn't have the garage that I wanted. Though that's when they start doing that. And another really quick thing I think is funny that sellers always say all the time too on showings is when feedback comes back of, well, it didn't have it, buyers didn't like it because it didn't have a 3-car garage or something like that.
Yeah.
They could see that.
Yes,
On
and
the
then
listing.
sellers
Yeah.
like,
They knew that
well,
before you
they
went
knew
there.
that before they
Right,
even
right.
came. Like,
Right.
what? It makes them so mad
Yeah, yeah,
to
yeah.
get that kind of feedback, right?
Because it's
It
something you
is.
can't
I mean,
change.
yeah,
Exactly.
yeah.
It's the
Or
Or they
location
didn't
we
like
didn't
it because
Right.
it didn't have a finished basement. Those are things. It's like clearly the listing says
right.
no finished basement.
And here's why though.
Because they were
Because
on the
they-
fence already.
They thought
they just-
maybe there were
Yes.
enough other things that
Yep,
checked
exactly.
their
Well, and
boxes,
then-
and they could overlook
Yes.
that
Overlook
one
it.
Say
thing.
that louder for the people on
Exactly.
in the back.
It's because maybe there were enough other things that checked all the other boxes
they
that could get
considered
them over
them to
that
do it.
hurdle.
Especially,
Right.
especially with low inventory.
Mhm.
Right.
Yeah.
You have
Yes,
to
they're
compromise.
starting to
They do.
compromise.
Mm-hmm.
So sellers, don't be frustrated with that feedback because what it's actually meaning is that the agent is just saying, you can kind of like put some hidden words in there, for the price, or, you know, compared to what they're looking for, they really wanted a 3-car garage, but they were willing to look at this property because if everything else wowed them so much, maybe they would have given up that 3-car garage. So the simple feedback for the agent is it didn't have the 3rd-car garage. We know that means it didn't have enough
enough.
wow
Other
factor,
things,
Right.
or
yeah.
for the price that they would have foregone
That.
their one criteria that was
Yes.
important to them, which was the 3-car garage. So
Right, right.
we know as agents how to interpret that. You've got to let us interpret that and believe us. But those are some funny.
The other really
things that-
important thing to do, to consider when selling a home is not only listening to, you know, we've been in so many, if you're on both sides of the deal, if you do buyers and sellers, chances are when you're listing a house in that area, you've taken tons of buyers, or you're an agent who goes to look at the houses just to be competitive in your market, but the buyers are really savy because they have been comparing houses for
Sometimes
anywhere,
years.
exactly, anywhere
Yeah.
from a couple weeks to a
Yeah.
couple years.
Yeah.
They've been kicking tires,
Yes.
and they're just waiting for that right one to come
Yeah.
along. And they've been studying those list prices and those
Mm-hmm.
closed prices. Sometimes they're off by 10 to 20%. So they're willing to throw a ton of money at the right house when they find it.
Right.
When they find it.
Right.
And so that's again what's pushing that price up. But buyers, they have sometimes compared north of 50 to 70 houses.
Yeah.
So they know for what their money can buy them out in the market.
I would agree. Anything else in closing for pricing and price reductions? Watch out for them. They're coming.
That's right.
Yeah.
They're
they
coming, but on the same token, get ready to compete for some of the ones that are going to have multiple offers. I wish we could say we have a market that is, you know, not so mixed bag, but I think we're going to go back into another season of heating us, especially if rates move a little bit. If rates move a little bit, you're going to see a crazy
Flurry of activity,
seller's
yeah.
market again of a buyer flurry that's going to happen. So if you think you can price a house on your own, I would urge you to maybe think again and contact one of these expert realtors sitting around this table who have been doing it over and over and over again on a mass number with lots of practice, and we still have angst about it. So I would say contact one of us first, make sure that you're not leaving money on the table or perhaps setting yourself up for failure that will then cost you money.
Yep.
Well said.
Well put.
Yep.
All right, that's a wrap.